These days, everybody's on the cost pressure. Everybody wants things faster. And you have a technology force that is struggling to stay current with what is happening in technology. And then you have a business that is trying to grapple with who do they partner with to make these technology choices.
And I'd like to bring it all back to kind of looking at how all of these elements combine to helping organization digitize for tomorrow, prepare for tomorrow, and transform for tomorrow.
What do you have? What don't you have? Right? Where do we get the data? Is the data available? Right? And then once we get that complete understanding of where they are, we then design and say, well, this is actually what you need.
So can you talk to me about some of the key elements that you look at when it comes to defining that strategy and ensuring that the technology matches the business?
Most of our customers are 10 plus years with us. And often we would tell customers that we do not see the business value in doing this. This is not going to provide you the efficiency you want. Sometimes we ignore it and sometimes we're not. AI doesn't solve everything.
The world is changing rapidly. Companies are under pressure to stay competitive and agile so they can meet customer needs today and tomorrow. It is challenging and demanding, and for Mint Group, it has become increasingly important to ensure that they provide their customers with the technology they need to thrive. I'm here with Carel Du Toit, the CEO of Mint Group, to talk about the business of tomorrow and what technology is needed to help organizations remain competitive. Welcome, Carel.
Thank you very much for having me. Tomorrow is such a key thing for us at Mint. Our tagline is Create Tomorrow, and with that is how do we infuse technology into helping citizens, our clients, employees, and just normal people to live better lives. The problem or the challenge of technology today is it's moving so fast. So to know what you can and cannot do is kind of part of the biggest trick. And I hope we can have a good conversation around that and what we're seeing in the market and how that can help.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned the challenges, and companies are under pressure right now. Can you talk us through some of the biggest challenges that they're facing? Just paint us a picture of the market at the moment.
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple of key things, right? From a macro perspective, there's a huge amount of volatility in the world. And let's face it, these things have impact on everyone. So if I look at our businesses across, South Africa, UAE, UK, different challenges in different countries. But I think the fundamental thing from a business perspective is pretty much the same. You still have, how do I sell something at a good margin and add value to my customers? Now, that used to be a far easier equation to have an answer to. But these days, everybody's on the cost pressure. Everybody wants things faster. And you have a technology force that is struggling to stay current with what is happening in technology. And then you have a business that is trying to grapple with who do they partner with to make these technology choices. So you've got this perfect storm of how do I find a partner on this engaging during while creating skills in my organization. And, this margin squeeze thing is incredibly real. It's facing, if I look at our organization, the amount of changes that we had to affect in the last 2 years. And I wouldn't say to move us forward, just to keep us relevant, just in that perspective has been quite tough. But, with every challenge comes a good opportunity. And I think that's where technology is playing a pivotal role now. You've got to make sure that your people are technology enabled, understand how to use the latest things like the AIs and the Gen AIs and understanding automation, and most importantly, how to work with people.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's two things there that you mentioned that I think are worth digging into, which are relevance and resilience, I think. How are these two qualities per se inspired by the use of technology, and how is not having them influencing company growth and expansion?
I would argue by not having them, you're making yourself irrelevant. The way to look at it is, in the past, if you stood still, you could still survive. Right? That's just no longer in the equation. If your business is not moving at least at the same pace as the market, you're moving backward. And the market is enabled by technology. So yes, there's things like regulation and governance and legislation that's got a massive influence, but everybody has those factors to deal with, right? So the one thing that you really have that is in your hands to control is technology and how that empowers your people.
Yeah. And resilience itself, how would you define that in the context of technology?
Resilience is, I would say, a factor that is across everything, not just technology. you have to have a workforce and a culture and a team that understands that not having this capability entrenched into the way you work will almost make it impossible to stay ahead. Resilience is more around, will your culture allow your team and you to perform when it matters most? And at the moment, there's a lot more matter most moments. There's just, we don't want to delve into politics, but there's a huge amount of things that's being put on South Africa, and we have our own challenges to solve. So if you're going to just add, let's say hypothetically, we used to have a big challenge to deal with every 6 months. We kind of feel like we have one every 6 weeks now. So the key thing around resilience is keeping the morale up, getting people to train, moving forward, having a learning culture. I think these things work together. You can't look at resilience in isolation.
I agree, actually. And I want to take us back a little bit full circle to what you were mentioning about the challenges themselves and why companies need to tackle them. So obviously one of them is obsolescence. But what are some of the other things that could affect organizations that aren't paying attention and aren't moving with the changes?
The key thing that every business has to focus on is its people, right? If you're not training your people and keeping them relevant around what's happening in the market in every segment, you're going to have a massive problem. And by not investing in your people, you're effectively not going to invest in technology, because the people are the ones that enable the technology. Very few things, even if you look at automation, it requires people to do design around those things, monitor those things, and a very small percentage of processes are really completely automated. So you always have this human that drive the process. In the end, it's really around the focus on your people and enabling them with technology and having an open mindset to change. And this is where we find the biggest problem. If I look at our clients across public sector, commercial, enterprise, most clients have this like, where do I start problem? I've tried all these different things and it worked and it didn't work. Fundamentally, you can't look at technology as a piecemeal approach. You got to understand how it infuses into your business strategy, and then how it differentiates your business strategy. In the old days where you had consulting companies that take 2 years to build your strategy and then take another 2 years to execute it, by now you're out of business. So you have to have a strong, adaptable strategy, and then you got to understand how technology is front and center. One of the pieces of work we do with a lot of our clients is when they have engaged the traditional consulting companies, that strategy was set up, with technology enabling it, not with technology differentiating it. And a lot of the work we do up front before we get involved in like value streams and how we're going to drive business for our clients is to move technology to the front of that conversation and say, what if this was possible, not in step D of the process, but in step A of the process? How would that change your efficiency? And that is just something a lot of people are not used to yet, because mostly a lot of people are still stuck in the automation space, because a lot of them haven't done that. And then one of the key things as well is adopting cloud technologies. The time where you had the ability to buy your own service and maintain them and patch them and, security, you cannot focus your attention there anymore. You got to leverage some of these cloud services like the Microsoft Azure stack and use what they've built, because they're innovating at a pace that is just, it's impossible for someone to follow. So for you as the biggest bank, for example, in Africa, to try and, do those things, you're going to put in your people and your attention on things that's not differentiating you. So sometimes there's a cost benefit, not always, but it's, you got to find this golden place where it is, time to value, and time to client experience improvement, and not get stuck in the stuff that you shouldn't.
Yeah. And that takes us to, very neatly, the technology itself. So you've mentioned the Microsoft Azure stack. What are some of the other technologies the organization should be looking at today?
You got to start with the two key things here, right? Data is the new fuel. So you got to make sure your data is in the modern landscape like Azure. But very importantly, and a lot of people miss this step, is you got to make sure it's secure, right? And the way to think about it is, if someone buys the latest electric Porsche, right, and you give it to them and you tell them drive, and they didn't do an advanced driving course and they don't understand a powerful car, they're not going to do a good job of this, right? And it's the same with cloud technologies, right? You have this massively powerful thing, but if you don't understand it, don't know how to architect it, don't know how to set it up in a secure way, you are going to look cool, but you're not going to perform well, right? And a lot of that is, you got to do these things with intent. So from a Microsoft perspective, our business focuses on across all the Microsoft technology stacks. So from Azure AI, app modernization, migration into the cloud, which are all very important foundational things to do. And then across the Microsoft 365 suite, where we do things like productivity, Office 365, Teams. Little example like meeting minutes. I can't understand how people are still doing manual minutes. It's not necessary. You can set it up correctly. Reading of emails. A practical example there is with one of the banks, we worked with them to implement Copilot. And the business case was for each agent in the call center to read one more email an hour. Right now, it sounds quite trivial, but one more email an hour throughput is 12% more. Right. And that's just, the cost of serving, and also the quality of the responses to the client improved because you build up a library, you use Gen AI. So you're really getting into this place where we have to bring it together. And then finally, a key part of what we do as well as in the traditional CRM space, like how do we help you sell better, segment better, market better, and then ultimately service the customer through service management. So we kind of go across the stack from that perspective. But I can tell you one thing, we might think we're going to start with a client in a specific area, but that's not where they are. So a lot of what we're doing up front is to understand where the biggest business benefit's going to be. Sometimes it's not about business benefits. Sometimes it's about legislation and governance and fines and these kind of things. And we start there, right? Because you don't want to pay a multi-million, 100 million rand fine due to, poor anti-money laundering, as an example, or poor data storage. And that's kind of part of the problem I was discussing earlier. Like, where do you start? And we generally try and find the business that's got the aptitude to change. And we focus on them, and then we kind of drive it out into other areas of the banks or the insurers or the city or the metros and so forth.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think one of the things that you highlight there is one of the reasons why a lot of cloud implementations fail is because people don't architect for strategy or within strategy, I think is a better way of framing it. And you did mention that. So it's not so much about the technology, it's about how that technology is applied within the business to
Correct.
achieve results. So can you talk to me about some of the key elements that you look at when it comes to defining that strategy and ensuring that the technology matches the business?
Yeah, no, interestingly, and that you say about failing deployments, in our business, about half the business that we get is taking over failed deployments.
Oof.
Right, so that's a big problem for those organizations. They've already spent a huge amount of money with other partners, and now we have to take a broken car, fix it while we have to make it a high performance car. So, and the reason always the same. They build before they design, and they shouldn't design until they understand why they're designing. So our business architecture team has got that focus. So we do value stream mapping for our customers to understand who's the executive stakeholder, what business objective they're trying to achieve. Is it cost? Is it revenue? Is it a combination? Is it client satisfaction? And then we delve deeper into the existing IT landscape. What do you have? What don't you have? Right? Where do we get the data? Is the data available? Right? And then once we get that complete understanding of where they are, we then design and say, well, this is actually what you need. And it goes a step further because you can also design very inefficiently. And I'll give an example. We had a customer where they just bought a hell of a lot of licenses. And in so much so that the license cost was kind of prohibitive for the project, but they continued. If it was designed correctly, we could have done the project with the implementation for under the cost of just the licensing. And that's a key part of the problem. You need someone that understands intrinsically what we're doing for you, why we're doing it for you, and in what sequence are we doing it for you. And in that way, you get to a point where you have a happy customer. Most of our customers are 10 plus years with us. And it's for that reason, because we always ask why. And often we would tell customers that we do not see the business value in doing this. This is not going to provide you the efficiency you want. Sometimes we ignore it and sometimes we're not. But at least, from our perspective, we got to do the responsible thing and make sure that we can add value to them.
Yeah. So adding value also comes in the shape of obviously emergent technologies. And I imagine that emergent technologies aren't necessarily always the solution. Can you talk me through some examples, and obviously we don't have to mention names here, but just examples of how you have integrated emergent technologies within organizations that have resolved challenges, but perhaps also where emergent technologies aren't quite there yet for that company, and what makes that why happen for you?
AI doesn't solve everything. We have a joke inside organizations: a fool with a tool is still a fool. And you can really do some funny stuff with AI that adds no value. I'll give you a practical example because we've done a case study on this. But for the Gauteng Department of Health, we've been engaged for a little under a year to digitize the patient records of Baragwanath Hospital, which is the third largest hospital in the world. Right, so plus minus 750,000 patient files. Now, if you look at that, the first thing you go is like AI can solve the problem. The reality is AI can't do anything with paper. Right? So the first step is, how do we get it digitized? Then how do we get it classified? Then how do we store it securely? And then how do we abstract it with AI to then ultimately provide you a view of the patient across all the different historical visits to the hospital? So it comes back to what I said earlier. It's really, when we engage, we understand the existing technology landscape, also the existing human resource landscape in the organization. So often, part of our engagement would be to set up a center of excellence at our clients, help them recruit people that would be running the center of excellence, getting them involved in the project, trained while we're in the project, and then ultimately own it, either completely or with us in an augmented model in the future years. So, maybe a really practical example around emerging technology versus, let's call it old tech for the sake of it, is when we talk about workflow. Workflow has been with us forever, right? But there's kind of three flavors of workflow now. You've got the traditional workflow, which is if A, then B, then do this, and that very much you need all the data, all the decision points, and you pre-made the decisions. All it does is automate rudimentary tasks. Okay. Then you have, in certain decisions in that workflow, there's an ability to leverage something like Gen AI to look at different content and make a decision for you or draft something for you. And that would be a good hybrid. But the third one is agentic workflow, agentic agent workflow, which there's enough data across the system where the AI agent actually makes the decisions, right? And literally zero human involvement. And a simple example could be opening a bank account or risk management. When we look at clients wanting to automate, we would understand what is available so we can determine in which buckets we're putting these things. And often we would need to go, well, we can really only do like one and maybe a little bit of piece two, because that's what you have available from a data landscape perspective at the moment, or from a security perspective at the moment. Because often, just throwing data into a central location can cause a huge amount of risk, because you need to make sure you lock the data down, the right people can see it. So again, it's very much where the client is on their journey, and what our job is really much to make sure that we leverage the right technology for what they can adopt. Because we've had clients where there's a real concern around job loss, but if you design it with a why up front, what you're doing is you're redeploying people, you're training them through the project, and then you're actually upping your throughput whilst reducing your cost. So again, that's why we have to know why we're doing this engagement and what is the value that the client want to drive.
The Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital project was a huge success. And I believe on the back of that, you have another healthcare project coming up.
Yeah, we've actually been running it for quite a few months. We're busy with the KZN province. I think we're about 12 hospitals down. The model there is a little different. So on that side, we are setting up a scanning factory per hospital, and then we're training the youth that the department is employed to then run the factory, and then we just monitor quality. So again, different needs for different clients, but the technology output is pretty much the same. So yeah, and on top of that, we do have some really good prospects for some of the metros as well, and some of the other government departments, because this is such a foundational thing to move us into the digital era, that you can then do some really good and nifty things with.
Yeah, and translate the issues with patient care into something a lot more holistic, which is amazing, because discrepancies across paperwork impact on well-being.
I mean, if you just look at the business case, and I've been speaking about business cases and why, at the different hospitals, there's different business cases, but fundamentally there are two key things that's always relevant. The one is malpractice. So there's a huge amount of lawsuits in South Africa, in the billions per year, because, people get the wrong treatment, or they don't get treatment because they couldn't find the files, and then there's loss of life or serious injury. And sometimes people can't even get their chronic medicine because their files can't be found. So the key thing here is to know, when we do this, we're going to solve, or relatively solve, some of these issues, because there's always a human factor involved. But if you look at the socioeconomic impact of what I mentioned now, chronic medicine, all right, the average waiting time at a public hospital in South Africa is 6 hours. And that is not to get medical care, that is to get your file. Okay. So if you're someone that has to work from Mondays to Fridays, it means that you gotta be at the hospital 5 a.m. on a Saturday morning and hope you get your file by 1, or by 2, and then hope by 4 you get your medicine. Now, we all know hope is not a strategy except if it's all you have, but I think this is a key thing that we're doing here. So the socioeconomic impact is huge. The ability to reduce the fine significantly, and then ultimately better patient care. So everybody that we talk to kind of start with better patient care, but there's a huge amount of things that's involved before we even get there.
Yeah. So this is obviously one of your amazing success stories. Do you have another to share with us?
There's a combination of projects. I mean, if I look at one of the businesses within Mint Group is an AI organization called Vision AI, and that focuses on manufacturing, and that is a AI business using computer vision that helps manufacturers. Now, you can go like, how do you help a manufacturer? Because effectively what our technology does is it uses the existing CCTV infrastructure to make it smart. So the way to think about it, there's a dumb camera, we plug our software and all of a sudden it can look at anything and tell you anything and give you prompts. So examples there is things like quality control. When people mix products together and it gets contaminants, as an example, they will pull the product out of the market 6 months later because people get sick, right? What we would then do is our cameras are monitoring and we'll see the color difference, or a person didn't put in the specific ingredient, or they put too much ingredients in, it will actually stop the production line. And it goes further into productivity enhancements, things like time on station. So if a person is not at their station monitoring things, why? And can we help the automation of the quality control? We've done things like quality control for pies. So the pies come off, you're like, stop the conveyor belt, there's a problem there. And then in Australia, they passed legislation now around forklifts and safety. So if a forklift operates within 10 meters of a human, there's a problem, and you have to report on it within a 24-hour window. So we built a model on top of our tech that automates it. So it automatically calculates how far the human is from different angles, and it says, well, it's outside 10 minutes, or it wasn't, and then it finds out who the person is, and they then kind of wave that they felt threatened. So there's a huge amount of interesting things that you can go to, and then there's the real grunt work. One of the largest glass manufacturers in the country. We've been doing work with them, and that is very much around operational efficiency side of things, right? How do I get my quotes out fast? And just by implementing really basic good governance and solutions, their throughput is more than 10x, at the same cost. So I don't have a bottleneck technology, which they had. So I don't want to really. I mean, we have a lot of projects, and I feel like if I don't mention all of them, I'm going to get into trouble. I mean, even healthcare is, as you know, a key thing for us. We help build a product for another company. We implement their product for them, and that's around age management. So a huge amount of the age management happening in KZN Eastern Cape is the technology we built and monitored with our partners. So it's always good when you sit back at night and have a glass of red wine, you go, what we're doing matters.
Yeah, it does. And I think now what I'd like to do is take how we've talked about the why, and we've talked about the how and the value. And I'd like to bring it all back to kind of looking at how all of these elements combine to helping organization digitize for tomorrow, prepare for tomorrow, and transform for tomorrow. So if they understand their why, then the technology they implement today will have the ability to evolve and adapt for tomorrow. Is that right? And if so, how?
It is right, but there's a couple of things that you have to consistently do afterwards, otherwise you're going to get stuck again. I mentioned some of it, but one of the key things, you got to take your people on a journey. For us, we have a far greater success at our customers where the customers invest in the technology and learn the technology. Right? And then we become an augmentation and an architecture partner where we keep on enabling them, because our job is to be the tip of the sword. Where we start doing all the hard work for the customers, it can become quite cost ineffective quite quickly. So it is really important the client has a culture of driving continuous, improvement, continuous learning, agility. And part of what we set up for our customers in Center of Excellence is things like agile methodologies. This is how we operate. Agile doesn't mean you get everything. Agile means you get the highest priority first, and we can change priorities. So it is that journey in terms of taking, especially the executive owner, through that process, and then through the IT teams and the change teams, is a critical part of the value chain. So if you understand why and you get it done, and we leave and you're in the same problem in a year, that's not sustainable. So a big part of what we do is to make sure that we set our clients up in terms of success and continuous delivery, because I always joke and say, I don't like a project because it's got an end date. and there's no more projects. There's just continuous engagement, continuous partnership for mutual success.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you. And any other thoughts before we wrap up this brilliant interview?
Hang on. The technology landscape, we are in it and we are tumbling. It is absolutely fascinating, but also slow down and do the basics right. You gotta really have a firm foundation in the why and the business case, but it's also fun. Remember to keep having fun and play with the technology. I did a talk not too long ago at the SAMSA conference, which is the Golf Management Association of South Africa, where I spoke to the golf directors and the GMs and the food and beverage managers around AI. And what is amazing, I'm an avid golfer. So as I go play now, I run into these people and they go like, I'm using AI for this and I'm using AI for that. I'm glad because they started playing. And if you're still in the place where you go, I've played with it, but I'm not quite sure what to do with it, you can only look in the mirror, and it is a transformational technology, but plugging it into enterprise is something that requires a little bit more thinking.
Yeah, no, exactly. Thank you very much, Carel. That was amazing.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
An epic interview.
Thanks.